Hello, and welcome to another Stellarian Games video. In this episode, we're going to be continuing some of the desert theme that we've been seeing over the last few episodes. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at how to make some Egyptian temple components, or sand temple components, if you will. And we're going to start with some very basic stone structures that can be put together to form kind of passageways in a buried temple, or a surface temple for that matter, either one. Just some nice dark stone work. Some of that is also going to form some very, very basic stone doorways. And then getting a little bit fancier and getting into some obelisks and some pillars. All of these are decorated to look like they have hieroglyphics on them. And I've even thrown in a 3D printed sphinx as well to kind of round out that whole collection. So all of these pieces can be used to kind of form a scatter terrain that you can form the different pieces of your temple as you play, rather than having one large temple. This is really just a wide variety of different pieces that you can put together and make your temple come to life in very different ways depending on how you need to play it. So let's go to the table and see how this one is done. Okay, to start this craft, we're going to use the hot wire table and cut some 2-inch XPS foam, just making a long straight cut, trying to make some blocks for our next pieces. Using that same width, just cutting out each of those individual blocks. These are going to turn into the basic building blocks of our pillars for this temple complex. Just cutting them out so that I have same size blocks for each one. Setting up those guides and then using one of my circle jigs on the hot wire cutter, twisting that so that it gets the column shape that it needs. And going to repeat that for each of those blocks that we just cut out. Then turning that guide on its side, I'm using the circle cutter as more of a lathe and lathing in some lines at even distances, using those blocks to fill in as spacers so that I'd get the same even lines on all of the different pillars. Then on some other pieces, I'm making some larger half-inch circles and cutting those in half. These are going to form the base of the pillars, or the caps of the pillars. Then holding those two together, keeping them aligned, using a soldering iron, I'm coming along and poking in just a little circle right where the two pieces meet. Once split apart, that will form an interesting looking base for the column to sit on, and then a nice cap to cover it. So those circle pieces will have just a nice shape for the overall column. Now using a ballpoint pen, coming along and adding in the hieroglyphics for the columns. I'm using actual hieroglyphics as a reference point, trying to put together what would look like the right writing on the columns. The large ovals, I believe in hieroglyphics, represent names, and then the others represent the different words and phrases of hieroglyphics. Now I'm attaching some screws on the inside of the pillar and then gluing it to gluing the base on. I wanted the screw in there to act as a weight to keep the pillars upright, but it would hide it from being seen once it was done. I'm coming along and giving each of these a base coat in the Mod Podge in black, giving it a base coat in this dark brown, and then doing a dry brush with this sandy tan. This will be kind of the same color scheme used in all of the different pieces. That dry brush really does help highlight the hieroglyphics and make those pop a little bit more. Now using a large sheet of paper, I'm cutting into some long, narrow strips. These are going to form the basis of the obelisks. Behind the styrofoam, I'm using a wedge or a shim that you might use to shim doors or windows if you're installing those in a house. I'm just using that to create the right angle that I wanted for the obelisk. I didn't want it to be just a rectangular piece. I wanted it to have that tapered feel, and I figured this would be a good way of getting that taper on the styrofoam. Then I have a nice tapered piece. Then I just cut a kind of a jig angle on that other styrofoam that I'm holding up against the guide, and using that to cut in the top angles of the obelisk as well. That'll give it a nice even top angle for all of the different items. Then using a ballpoint pen, I'm outlining kind of a outside perimeter of the obelisk, and then within that will go all of the different writing and hieroglyphics. Again, using actual hieroglyphics as the basis. Obviously, I'm not understanding what it's meaning, but I'm at least copying a lot of the symbols to give it a nice kind of authentic feel. Once that's done, adding some screws to the bottom of each of these. I'm adding 2 of them to really try to weight the bottom of these to make them stand upright nice and easily. Base coating these in the black paint and Mod Podge. Then I decided to break this one in half, giving it a broken column feel, and cutting out a spot on the inside of it for 2 magnets. That way it could be a solid column if I need it to be, but it could also be a broken column if I wanted it to be as well. So just hot gluing those into place, and then adding a little black paint to cover the exposed pink styrofoam as well. Once all that's dry, I'm coming along with that dark brown base coat, and then going to that sandy tan as the dry brush. Again, that sandy tan really added a lot of pop to the hieroglyphics. Now I'm going back to the full sheet again and marking out a whole big grid work of 1-inch lines and 1/2-inch lines, and then coming along with a 1-inch grid as well. And this is going to start forming the basis for all of the blocks for the wall structures that we're going to use. Just cutting out each of those 1-inch and 1/2-inch strips, and then aligning those and cutting the blocks into various sizes in 1-inch blocks, 2-inch, 3-inch blocks, just giving myself a lot of different variations to work with to build all of the different wall structures. Once I had them all cut out, I'm using some rocks in a coffee can and shaking them up to get the texture of the stone that I want on each of these. And then I'm just using hot glue and starting to assemble a variety of different shapes, starting with some doors and doorways, and then just putting together blocks in varying combinations to form the wall patterns that I wanted, and essentially making blocks that I can use to throw out on the table or the UDT and create whatever shape I need for temple structures. Building some stairways as well. Then coming along, doing the black paint Mod Podge, same pattern as all of the other pieces that we've done so far. This black paint Mod Podge really helps give it a nice firm coat for use of play. Dark brown base coat, and then the sand colored dry brush. And these are the finished pieces. As you can see, I also added some 3D printed sphinxes to go along with this, but the columns and the obelisks along with the walls give a convincing desert temple feel. So I hope you liked this video. If you do, please hit the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.